Bob Woodward, thank you for joining us. Your book paints a picture of an erratic president who neither knows nor cares about the processes of government or diplomacy, up against people trying to stop him making moves they believe would be bad for the country. It seems so much hangs on the whims of this president.
He's not a strategic thinker. He doesn't plan out, and so many people in the White House worry that he's going to do something erratic which will endanger the national security or the financial security of the United States, perhaps even the world. So they try to contain him, and the book opens with his top economic advisor removing a letter from Trump's desk in the Oval Office, fearing that he will sign it and trigger a series of events in South Korea which will jeopardize one of the most important top secret intelligence operations going on.
Is it the case that the president's belief in his approach has been reinforced by the political rewards it has generated? I'm thinking here of North Korea and also most recently the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court.
Look, the president has had some political victories, but the question is at what cost? With North Korea, he threatened Kim Jong-un late last year, early this year, said, "I have a bigger nuclear button on my desk than you," and people were horrified at this standoff because Kim Jong-un has nuclear weapons. Then the president shifted his approach, and they met in Singapore this year, and they seem to be at least talking, which is a good thing. But you need, particularly with a regime like North Korea, which does not have the experience of having nuclear weapons, of being very careful and making it very clear what your intent is. Trump sounded very warlike at one point, and then he sounded conciliatory, and now he says, who knows what's going to happen. That's a dangerous way to communicate with a regime like North Korea.
There are cases you document in the book, nonetheless, where Donald Trump is right to question the establishment's policy positions, aren't there? I'm thinking about Afghanistan here.
Which he did in Afghanistan. He wanted to pull out. I believe he still would like to pull out, but the generals have persuaded him, no, let's send more troops, and they've sent just a few thousand more. What worked for them was to take out of the public arena a discussion of exactly how many troops are going to be there, how many are taken away, how many are put in, and by getting that debate off the front page of the newspapers and out of television, they've kind of stabilized the situation. At the same time, they all know in the Pentagon and the generals and the Secretary of Defense, the president wants to get out. So again, it is not a stable, well thought out strategy.
Are there any signs that the instability and lack of control in the White House establishment have settled down now, or is that just not possible under this presidency?
There is a scene in the book a couple of months ago where Tom Bossert, who is the president's cybersecurity chief in the White House at the time, comes in and he's going to go on television, and the president talks about, boy, these tariffs that I'm going to put on China, let's even go to $500 billion, which of course now we know it's heading there. But the president says, hey, look, you're going to be on a Sunday television talk show. Too bad it's not on a Monday, because if it was a Monday and you went this strong, we would tank the markets. Well, a president's job is not to send the stock and other markets down, and there is a kind of random instability in all of this, which causes people in the White House to say, we've got to take papers off his desk, we have to contain him in some way because it's not clear where he's going.
There is obviously a lot of focus on the relationship between the president and Russia, but Is his never back down approach actually a much bigger risk?
Well, I think that's true, and the whole relationship with Russia is very interesting. He does have a love affair with Putin, there's no question. At the same time, this April, when there was the second use of chemical weapons in Syria, President Trump went on television and blamed Putin for helping Syria with this and was very, very tough on Putin. So in lots of things with Trump, it's not just one-dimensional, but it will go hot and then cold and then back to hot. And it is the unpredictability of all of this. And as I say, it is an administration and White House that's going through it and having a nervous breakdown. There is not the team approach. Everything is not working in some coordinated fashion. We know, I've done books and reporting on 9 presidents, Nixon through Trump. It's 20% of the presidents we've had in this country. And no matter what president you're talking about, there has to be some kind of planning. Trump will occasionally do some planning, but then undercut it. For instance, a strategy was worked out in the White House to mobilize the world against China on the trade violations. It was all set to work. The president grew impatient. He called the steel executives from the United States to the White House and imposed steel and aluminum tariffs, all on his own, contrary to the strategy that they had laid out. So here the impulse defeats his larger purpose. The idea of everyone in the world knows that the Chinese practice all kinds of unfair trade practices. Europeans, everyone in Australia, you know this. And you could have mobilized, you could have worked the world to try to develop something to isolate the Chinese on this, but the president took actions that actually undermined what he was trying to do.
If we were to go full circle in your career, could you reflect on the difference in the political culture between the Nixon and Trump eras and how we have got to a point where so much is now tolerated from the president that may not have even been tolerated in the Nixon era?
Well, you could spend a lifetime comparing them. One change is the media landscape. The internet, the impatience of speed, give it to me now, summarize, give me one sentence. Everyone is kind of much more on edge. I think it's unfortunate. People in my business have become emotionally unhinged by Trump or emotionally attracted to everything he does. And so you see in the television coverage here, it's one way or the other more often than not. And so what's the center? And the center should be fact-driven. There's not enough of that. So we are at a moment, and of course Trump, part of his political skill is to realize, and he's realized this for years, that the internet is out there, that he can tweet something and control the agenda and determine what everyone's talking about and the reporting on it. And so there will be a big story coming up, and Trump will totally distract everyone in the government and the media, and to a certain extent the country, with what he decides the agenda should be. Presidents have incredible power. I would argue that Trump has more power now, particularly in the communications realm, than Richard Nixon ever did.
Well, finally, I was wondering if you could reflect on how you think Donald Trump's time will change the presidency for good, in the sense of the relationship between the president's office and the democratic institutions in the United States.
That's a great and important question, and obviously we don't know. Karl Rove, who was the chief political advisor to President George W. Bush, I remember going up to see Rove and to talk about the Iraq War. And Rove made the key point that in politics everything depends on outcomes. And that is obvious, but something that's often forgotten. And the question is, in the national security area, in the financial security area, the global trade environment, these global relations, we don't know how this is going to end. It could end badly, or there could emerge some stability. I often say that presidents live in the unfinished business of their predecessor. Trump's predecessor, President Obama, there was a handoff. This is the condition of the economy, the condition of the world. And a big issue is, okay, what are you going to do if you want to change things? It's not surprising that Trump wants to change a lot, but you inherit a framework, the old order, if you will. And there's a scene in the book where the president's closest advisors tell him, like Secretary of Defense Mattis, just said plainly to him, the stability in the world order comes from this rules-based international series of agreements. The Secretary of State says these agreements have kept the peace for 70 years. Trump wants to get rid of that. You can't, if you have to live in the house, you can't burn it down. You have to make some adjustments and adopt what that framework is. And the president at these meetings will just lay down the law and say, that's BS, I don't agree with that. And so there is a lot of consternation and anxiety, if not frenzy, in Washington now about what he's going to do, where he's going to go. And it is uncharted, and he was elected to do the uncharted, to do things that are not normal. But you can't just kind of say, like he said, he wants to, NATO, for instance, very, very concerned about NATO, that we're funding all of these troops in Germany, and everyone in the defense establishment tells him that's really a good deal, but he's always going back, we're being played for suckers, we're providing this security at our expense. And you have to adopt some of the old if you're going to transition to the new.
Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.